So due to popular demand, we are talking about subjects. We're talking about how to choose what subject to do for your part three, what works and what doesn't work from a part three point of view. And in there, I think we will possibly cover the sequence of what to teach and when to teach it, because I know this has been asked by a few of you, and links a little bit to what we were doing on Thursday. It's Tuesday now, yeah. So on Thursday night, so it links a little bit into that. So I'm just going to start talking and see where it gets me. Those of you that have been on before and know me know that before I know it, it will be 9 o'clock and I won't have shut up. My brain is currently thinking, subjects, well, what can we say about them? But I can pretty much guarantee I'll fill the hour. Subjects. Those of you, again, who know me, who might have been to some workshops or might have been watching some videos, will know that although the emphasis tends to be put on subjects, so if you think about it from a part three point of view, a little part three form here, at the top, the emphasis is very much on the subject that you are going to do. Now, from a part three point of view, those boxes up there are nothing to do with you. You do not have to be sitting here thinking, look at those, whatever it is, 10 boxes, I haven't counted them recently. Look at those 10 boxes. I need to fit in a lesson into those boxes. So I'm going to have to do either rural roads or dual carriageways or recapping a manoeuvre. You do not need to fit your subject into one of those boxes. The only reason those boxes are there is to save the examiner some time. Those are the top, 10 subjects, topics, if you like, that driving instructors tend to choose. So it's merely saving the examiner time. He just has to tick a box. And often what will happen is, despite what it is that you've said to the examiner that you're going to do with your pupil, the examiner quite often won't tick that box until the lesson is well established and he recognises what actually you are teaching. I'll give you an example. I had a driving instructor who was doing roundabouts. He didn't do a single roundabout with his pupil because the problems that happened on the way to the roundabouts made him not even go anywhere near a roundabout. He got 51 out of 51. So he wasn't, he was doing roundabouts and never ended up doing a roundabout. Just for your information, if you do choose to do roundabouts, that would go ticked as junctions. Roundabout is a junction.
But if you were to say you do that, then you don't do it because you're bad planning, then that would go.
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be appropriate.
Exactly. So if they mucked up coming out to some, you end up doing clutch control, heel starts or whatever, then that's fine. It's a change of plan, that's absolutely fine. But if you don't do something and you don't do it, just don't do it, then that would.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing, so I was just going to say that it seems also your training is quite probably very subject based because of the 21T and the 21AT. It's all them subjects, isn't it? It's just the way it has to be, but it doesn't have to. Like here, I think a lot of people expect us to do all these talks about different subjects every week or every time, and it's just not the case, is it? Because it's not about subject.
Yeah. In terms of subject, so when should you guys learn about a subject? You should be learning your subject during your part two. That is the missing part in the link, and Jane and I are fairly passionate about the fact that we believe that your part twos, your training for your part twos lets you guys down, because your part two is to learn the subjects. Your part three is how to teach them, not to learn the subjects. So your
part two is what to teach.
Absolutely.
And part one is why you're teaching a lot of these things, and certainly to a certain extent what you're going to teach. Part two is definitely what you're going to teach and how you're going to do things. And part three is about how you're going to teach it.
Yeah.
So the part three in theory should be the easiest one.
Yeah.
If your training is structured correctly, but I can see some faces and see that's not the
case. I guess what we mean by that is that in terms of your part three training, I'm pretty sure that many of you had part three training that was, part two training that just was a bare minimum of hours. You might have been given 10 hours in car or possibly even less than that. That tends to be the average, isn't it? 10 hours in car. I have a PDI, I don't think she's on here tonight actually, but I have a PDI who's working her way to her part three. She did 32 hours of part two training with me. Okay, 32 hours of in-car part 2 training before nailing her part 2, because the majority of the 32 hours we did was part 3 related. And what we were doing is, while we were learning the subject, we were learning how you teach the subject. So we linked the two together. So at the point where she passed her part 2, she had 32 hours under her belt of her part 3 training.
Which can be signed off.
Absolutely signed off, because she'd done her part 3 training.
You can do things like walkthroughs and things like that. You can even practice what you would say to a pupil. So you do it as like a third party. You can ask yourself or tell yourself what to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
so check your middle mirror, check your right mirror. There's someone there, so you're going to pop a signal on. And you, therefore, when your bum's in the other seat on a part 3, it's all there. It's already all there. Yeah. And exactly breaking down what you're going to do. So when do you put the clutch down? When do you change gear? When do you start looking? Where do you start looking first? When do you decide to go? If it's all covered in your part 2, it just doesn't make the part 3 very happy.
And I know some of you have requested, particularly on the PDI group, some of you requested that perhaps Blaine and I, and we need to talk about this, Blaine and I do some kind of reconstruction, or hate that role play stuff, but a reconstruction or a demonstration of a full talk through, for example, to show you what we're covering when we're covering it, because that's basically it. That off gas, gentle brake, clutch down, first gear. Keep your clutch down, look to the right, look to the left, slowly off your clutch, gentle gas. It's that ability to talk through your subject that you're needing to have, and that's where your part 2 should come.
Time of it as well as the thing that most people struggle with.
Yeah.
If you're doing that in your part 2, you're getting a really good understanding of the subject and what you're doing when you're doing it, because that's what you're going to pass on, and the ability to actually say it. So that's, we're passionate about that, and we're just literally making loads of videos about that at the moment, aren't we? And we will do something, we'll probably do one of these live chats where we show a video, maybe a few minutes of we're doing a talk over on something, and then get you to talk about it and so on. I may even get some brave soul to have a go at talking through the videos. We could play the video and have one of you guys trying to talk through it. That'd be quite good fun, wouldn't it? Any volunteers?
But then we'll suddenly have internet issues. Okay, so in terms of subjects, so back onto that. So those of you that have heard my videos or my workshops, you'll hear me say, forget to a certain extent subjects. Forget about subjects, think about skills. Because if I said to you guys, give me a skill that we teach, and I got you all to think about it, and perhaps write in the text box if you want to, particularly if you know and you're just using this as a bit of a refresher. But in terms of skills that we teach at driving instructors, there are only 5 skills that we teach. And the 5 skills that we teach are awareness, anticipation, planning. Quite often they 3 go together: awareness, anticipation, planning, judgment, and car control. That's it. Awareness, anticipation, planning, judgment, and car control. I call those the high 5 skills. I'll repeat them again because I know some of you are scribbling them down. Awareness, planning, anticipation, judgment, and car control. What I'd like you to do is, after the word awareness, I'd like you to put open brackets, observations, close brackets, because I think people confuse observations with awareness. And those of you that have been on the live chats before might have heard me, and possibly even a few weeks ago now, say that I never talk about effective observations with my pupils. I don't talk about observations. I talk about awareness, because that is so much stronger and means so much more. So awareness, planning, anticipation, car control, and judgment. After judgment, I'd like you to put open brackets, decision making, close brackets, because that is the skill that comes with making that decision, is based on your judgment, to then follow that through with a decision.
A skill of self-awareness.
Okay, self-awareness. What I want you to do is I want you to think about those high 5 that I've just said. Over the top of that high 5, I want you to draw an umbrella. And that umbrella that covers all of your high 5 is self-evaluation. Okay, so the self-evaluation skills that I know we talked about within our client-centered learning coaching conversation that we had a week or so ago, that is a skill that covers all of those high 5. Because if you don't have the ability to be self-aware and evaluate, then it doesn't matter what you're doing within those 5 skills if you're not looking at your own factors that you're taking into account. However, let's concentrate on your high 5 skills. If you guys, particularly those of you who are obviously out there teaching and who have had pupils who have been to test, or perhaps if you have failed your own Part 2 test, if you think about that test, you think about a pupil who has failed, or if you failed a Part 2 test, think about what you failed for. So think about the last people that you had and what they failed their test for. And
or even if you haven't had any of those, what you've possibly failed your own driving test.
Yeah, because if you can think that far back, absolutely.
And there were so many.
Well, you had so many, yeah, absolutely.
Don't tell them
that. Because you could say, well, I had a pupil who got too close to parked cars, and so she's been given a serious fault for her clearance. Or I had a pupil who just didn't see the zebra crossing, and the examiner had to dual control them, and that would have gone down as pedestrian crossings or awareness of something. I can't remember off the top of my head what that little box is called. But I can almost guarantee that 98% of the time your pupil would have failed for awareness, planning, anticipation and judgment. They wouldn't have failed for clearance. They wouldn't have failed for a meeting situation. They wouldn't have failed for not stopping at the red light. They failed for not having the correct judgment when it came to passing parked cars. They failed for not planning and awareness and anticipation when it came to the meeting situation that they didn't plan for or aware for. The zebra crossing, absolutely. It was planning, awareness and anticipation. It wasn't just not seeing it. So if you think about what pupils fail for, they tend to fail for awareness, planning and anticipation and judgment issues. Rarely will they fail for a car control issue, because what I would suggest is that a car control fault happens after a fault for one or four of the other things has already happened. So what happens is they fail to then control the car because something has gone wrong with their awareness, anticipation, judgment or decision making. No, awareness, planning, anticipation and judgment. And that manifests itself in a problem with car control. So what I'm going to say to you guys is pose this thought, is that a fault does not start inside the car. A fault starts outside the car and manifests itself inside the car.
Via the brain.
Yeah.
Not via the brain.
Yeah. Okay. So the fault is going to happen outside the car before your pupil does or doesn't do something that then generates a car control fault because of it. Yet, when you think about teaching subjects and you think about teaching full stop, we tend to be car controlled focused. So we can focus on controlling the car rather than focusing on the other skills, which is the thing that is going to kill them. That's the bottom line. It will be awareness, planning, anticipation, and judgment that kill them. The car control will happen because they got the other four things wrong. So I very often say, don't think subjects, think skills. So what skill are you going to go off and teach your pupils? Now, if I said to you to think of a subject, so let's say roundabouts, and then I asked you to think, what skills do you teach when you teach roundabouts? Awareness, planning, anticipation, judgment, car control. What skills are you teaching when you're teaching a maneuver? Awareness, planning, anticipation, car control, judgment. What skills are you teaching when you teach rural roads and country lanes? Awareness, planning, anticipation, judgment, car control. Can you see that? It doesn't matter what subject you are teaching, it's the same skill, just put into different contexts. And this is why, one of the reasons why I'm going to say to you, think skills rather than subjects when it comes to your Part 3, is because it will, it will keep you on track. Because one of the things that I see happen with people on lessons and on Part 3s is you become so subject focused that everything else goes out of the window, and you tend not to then focus on the things that need to be focused on. So, for example, if you were going off to do junctions, your brain will be so focused on doing junctions that when it comes to a meeting situation or the zebra crossing, you're not on it, let alone your pupil not on it, because it's not in your brain as something that you're covering. But those of you who have experience, even a little bit of experience of going out with pupils, know that the second the engine gets turned on and the car starts to move, everything is on subject. You can't just not be talking about the bus that's coming towards you on the other side of the road as it's going past a cyclist, because you're not talking about buses. I'm not talking about buses, I'm doing junctions. You can't not talk about the 7 people on the zebra crossing, because I'm not doing zebra crossings, I'm doing junctions. Everything is on subject. But if you think about being on skills, so awareness, planning, anticipation, car control, and judgment, everything is then on subject. And one of the beautiful things about focusing on those 5 skills is that you can have those 5 skills written on a post-it note, stuck on the dashboard. And if your brain is empty and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to ask next? What do I speak about next? You ask a question or you make a comment about awareness, planning, anticipation, car control, or judgment. Okay, so what are you anticipating around the corner? What could you expect to happen as you get towards these lights? What are you anticipating this red car doing? Can you see that it's just going to be a focus of a conversation that is going to allow you to put some structure to what it is that you're talking about? It's also a fantastic conversation to have with pupils, and I often set my PDIs this task of telling me a different word for awareness. So in other words, go away and tell me exactly what the definition of awareness is. Go away and tell me what the definition of planning is. Go away and come back and tell me what the definition of anticipation is. Because actually, once you start thinking about what is the definition of awareness, what is the definition of planning, what is the definition of anticipation, it really starts you thinking about all the clever ways that we can be bringing these subjects into our lessons. And in fact, if you can think of another word to use except awareness, planning, anticipation, or judgment, you'll find that your vocabulary in your lessons will also get more interesting. So let's pose this in the chat box. If I said to you guys, give me your definition of anticipation. So what do we mean by anticipation? I'll give you just a little bit of time just to have a write down. What do we mean by anticipation? If you don't want to write in the text box, feel free just to write something down for your own benefit, and we'll see what you guys think we mean when we say anticipation. What you're expecting to happen. Thank you, Diana. Thinking thoughts ahead. Preempting situations. Predicting. Yeah, absolutely. Lovely. Can you see the other words that you are coming up with there? Expecting, preempting, predicting, forward thinking. These are just 4 words that have popped up on the text box that you could be using with your pupils instead of the word anticipation. So you can see that you could go to your part 3 just doing anticipation. Just doing anticipation. And every single opportunity we get to anticipate things.
With those subjects we are on the list, and any other subjects you can think of in the industry are known as carrier subjects. What that means is you're going to do something like Luther's one of those 5, and you're going to use a carrier subject to practice that thing. The roundabouts is a carrier subject for anticipation, awareness, planning, whatever part you want to focus in on, or you could do all 5 and use pedestrian crossings as your carrier, so as something to sort of lay it on, if that makes sense. And once you start thinking like that, you should come away from subjects being subjects, if that makes sense, and subjects being an ability or a thing to be able to teach those skills on. So try to think of them as what they call, the SEs call them carrier subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to throw another few in there, for those of you that are old enough to remember Mystic Meg, you know, Mystic Meg is all about anticipation, okay? It's all about the prediction. It's all about the... I don't know what happened. No, I think she's still good. I think she's still online. I think she is. Absolutely, yes. Look, we've got some nodding people. Yes, absolutely. She's... it's all about the crystal ball. It's all about, it's magic. You know, you get your anticipation right and pupils will think you're magic. It's not magic, it's experience, okay? But that's the skill that we're wanting them to gain experience to become magic.
I would say the most important person that needs to develop those skills is yourself as well. In the respect of being in that instructor seat, it's all going to be new to you, but me and Lou can tell what's going to happen. We know what that cyclist is going to do before they've even got on their bike, just because it's happened 1,000 times before. So you need to be learning those 5 skills yourself to be able to pass them on, and that starts on your part 2.
Same with the text box. What is the definition of planning? So have a think about that. What is the definition of planning? I'll give you just a minute or two. Open the front door. So what have we got? Preparing, how we are going to carry out a manoeuvre, thinking about what you need to do, organising your journey, preparation. Yeah, lovely. Again, can you see that you've come up with words that we could be using instead of the word planning, but are just as relevant or important? Throw it out there for you guys. For me, the definition of anticipation is what other people are going to do. The definition of planning is what I'm going to do. Does that make sense? So the planning is the me bit. The anticipation is what other people are going to do. So the emphasis there is slightly different. The emphasis is on them, and then the emphasis on me. So I quite like that. But you know, sometimes just as simple as throwing this question out to your pupils. Tell me what the definition of planning is. Tell me what you think planning is. Give me another word for planning and see what they come back with. Because that is just, again, a fab way of having a conversation, starting a conversation, and then linking it into your carrier subject. So that's lovely. I hear you talking about planning. I hear you talking about anticipation. I'll put that into the context of roundabouts. Tell me how you're going to plan for a roundabout. That can you see that you can then link it into the carrier subject that you are going to do. Where have you gone somewhere? Okay, sorry. Thinking about skills rather than subjects, and that will keep you on track. The other thing, and some of you may have heard this in workshops, is how I see this work really well from a part 3 point of view, is that if you've got your pupil thinking about the skill that they need to work on rather than the subject, it means that everything is then on subject. Everything is on subject the second that car gets turned on. It means that if you're going to go off and look at awareness planning anticipation on rural roads, for example, it means that as soon as that car starts rolling, you can be saying, okay, give me one thing that you're anticipating as we come out of this car park. Give me 2 things that you're planning for as we come out of the test centre car park. You can see that what you do is that you literally grab that pupil on a really tight rein and you've not let them go. So things are not going to roll out of control even in the test centre car park. And you remember me saying this last week about how don't go looking for trouble, trouble will find you. Trouble will find you as you leave the test centre car park and the 1111 is coming back in on the wrong side. Okay, so that is where it's just going to happen. If you're planning it, tell me what you can be planning for. Oh, I'm planning for another car to be coming around the corner. What are you going to do about it? So now we're about car control. So what are you going to do? How are you going to keep yourself safe with that? Well, I'm going to go really slowly, Louise. How are you going to go slowly with clutch control? Show me, show me, show me. Can you see that we can just bring it round to showing a car control skill when we've got the other subjects covered? So absolutely think in terms of what's going to work for you, what your pupil needs in terms of what skill your pupil needs you to be covering from a part 3, and link that in. Because of course the subject has to be relevant to your pupil, but I would suggest that every pupil, regardless of standard, needs awareness, planning, anticipation, car control and judgment. So in terms of what you're doing within whatever subject you're using as a carrier, it's the skill is going to be absolutely 100% relevant to the people that you're going to be using.
When you think about it, even the first lesson involves those skills.
Absolutely, I would suggest.
Judgment, when to move off and everything else. So whether you go into great detail at that stage is a discussion for another day.
Well, that's where you're layering it up, isn't it? And that's where the level of awareness, planning, anticipation, car control and judgment that you're doing with the people on lesson 2 is very different to the level that you might be doing with the people who's got a test next week. The skills are the same skills. How deep we're going and how far we're digging and how much, of course, independence and responsibility we're giving within those is very dependent on the people that you're taking on.
Yeah, and you may be going deep into one of those skills, but just touching on the others, or going deep into 2 and then maybe dipping to the next one. Just is very fluid depending on what's going on around you.
Mm-hmm. And I think that because they link so nicely in, awareness links to anticipation links to planning links to your decision making and judgment, and that links to what you're going to do with the car, which is ultimately car control. So there is this natural progression of which you might loiter more on one or another, depending on what the focus is going to be for that particular.
I think the early stages, possibly the first 5 to 6 hours, you're predominantly going to be doing car control with the other things around that, but there's more car control to be learned there. Once you get past that stage and they can stop, start and steer, the other things come much more into it, don't they? Because the ability to know when to stop, start and
I think that's what you say, isn't it? It takes 10 hours to teach the neurotypical people how to stop, start and steer. It takes indefinite amount of time to teach them when to stop, start and steer. That's the key.
Yeah, I think you guys probably found this if you've done your part 2, which I know most of you have, that you weren't taught how to change gears or how to accelerate or how to brake. You were probably told when to do those things differently, so different timing of those things, and maybe jumping the gears and that type of thing, but not how to drive. You were probably hopefully taught how to think, which is what you should spend most of your time teaching your pupils, rather than how to do it. So beginning and then it's how to think, which covers a lot of those skills anyway, isn't it? Thinking is most of those skills.
I'm just going to have a little read of the text box, so bear with me. So Anil has said, would you have to set up the sharing of responsibility so that you are doing Q&A, because you might have agreed to talk them through or to remain silent? Absolutely, Neil, that relates to your level of instruction that's going to be set, related to the pupil's level and their ability and, of course, the area that you're going to be in. So absolutely, if you were going to be doing a Q&A about those skills that we were talking about, absolutely, that's agreed that Q&A is going to be appropriate. But even when you're talking through, if you're talking somebody through something, I expect that what you are talking them through is predominantly car control, because you're giving instructions to somebody to follow. But if you are not aware, anticipating, planning and using your judgment, your talk through of the car control is not going to be right. So for you to do a full talk through and take complete control for the car control bit, so follow my voice, just do as I'm telling you to do, you have, for want of a better way of putting it, said, I am taking full control for awareness, planning, anticipation and judgment, and all I want you to do is follow my instructions. So by the very nature of doing a full talk through, you've taken responsibility for those things. So you have to be pretty shit hot on those other 4 things if you're going to be doing a full talk through. What? No, sorry, sorry. Just beep me. Okay. So, and actually what tends to go wrong with those of you who are less experienced is that your ability to talk through is not linked to your own awareness, anticipation, planning and judgment, and so you get that wrong, so the instruction you then give has been incorrect or at a wrong time, etc., etc. So it's really important that if you are doing that, you are absolutely knowing what you're doing with those other 4 skills. The other thing that I'd say is if you are doing a full talk through with a pupil, at the point where a little bit of muscle memory and an ability to control the car has been gained, you are absolutely now throwing the weight back and the emphasis on those other skills. Because it's all very well them being able to do what I tell you to do, but if they don't have the ability to be aware, to plan, to anticipate and make their own judgment, then it's not going to, the skill is neither here nor there. So the second, if you are choosing to do it that way round, because your pupil needs to be talked through something, the point where they are getting that, and the earlier the better, the more your emphasis then comes on pushing them to be telling you how they're making the decisions to do the car control thing. So what they are going to be thinking when they do the car control thing. So I would suggest that particularly with your early stage pupils, there is a massive mix between full talk-throughs and Q&As, depending on the situation and what they are grasping and what they can then take some responsibility for.
And you can mix and match it even on one approach to a roundabout. You might be telling on some things, asking other things, and waiting on other things.
As long as everybody knows,
Yeah.
as long as there's not telepathy involved, as long as you're not just going to shut up and expect the people to know it's now their turn to do everything, because that clearly wouldn't make sense. If you're going to talk them through one roundabout, it's all gone very well, and then throw them into another roundabout without saying, well, that was really good, well done, do you think you could take responsibility this time? If you're just going to shut up and let them do a roundabout and them to perceive that they were waiting for you to be talking them through something, you can see that's where your roles and responsibilities have gone wrong.
An absolute classic of that is roundabouts, judgment, particularly, or traffic lights. You've been telling them all the traffic lights, or cover the brakes, red traffic lights, come to a stop. Oh, they're getting that, and then let them go. They're waiting for you to say stop at the red light, and you don't, so they just carry on, which can be quite exciting if you want that type of excitement in your life. And roundabouts, judgment, particularly if you're taking the judgment for them, which is fine, and then you think, oh, their judgment is quite good, I'll let them have a go. They're still waiting for your judgment because you haven't said, on this time, you tell me when you're going to go. So you've got that halfway house potentially. Or the judgment is quite good, you take responsibility, but I'm ready if you make a mistake. So as long as everyone knows. But you might take full responsibility for mirrors because the mirrors are shocking, and no responsibility for gears because their gears are really good. So you can mix and match. You don't have to be one for the whole process. You can, it gets complicated, but as time goes on, that's where the skills come in.
So in terms of taking the part 3 out of the equation, in terms of your curriculum, for want of a better word, your order of subjects. So as an instructor for 30 years, what is your order?
Weird, really. I'm joking, well, I am and I'm not really. It would depend on the pupil. So I've had pupils that have very gifted, and you start to talk them through, pull away and stop in a car park, and you know the experience of really getting that. So I can think of one pupil that I had on a dual cadge around the first lesson. So that's one in 30 years. I can think of pupils that I've kept in car parks for 5 or 6, 10 hours because they needed that skill. They needed the ability to brake and steer and all that stuff. So it is very, 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 I think of the word.
Instinctive.
It's instinctive, but it's variable. Depends on the pupil. But to give a list of things I would definitely want to be getting right is the ability to follow my instructions. If I've got people that can follow my instructions, like the guy who went on the dual carriageway, and he had to go somewhere, and it's where it goes now, but it was a funny situation, that he was able to follow my instructions, had lots of natural ability. So therefore, I was happy to do that. But if you've got someone that struggles for whatever reason to follow your instruction, and normally there's a few reasons for that. One, they just struggle to follow instructions. So our 12-year-old, for example, is going to be quite interesting, isn't he, to follow instructions?
He won't struggle to follow instruction. He will choose not to. That's the difference.
It's a bit of both, isn't it? So if anyone wants to volunteer in 5 years' time, that's good. I've lost my thread now. And you've got people that just really trying to follow instruction, but their brain doesn't tell their hands and their feet what to do. So it can depend on what's happening. It's I know you lot want to list like we do this in the first lesson, second lesson. It just doesn't work like that. But what you do want to cover is you want to make sure that they can follow instructions, or they do follow instructions, and they have the ability to press the correct pedal at the correct time, because that's obviously crucial, isn't it? A lot of people worry about things like steering and stuff before they go on the road. That doesn't bother me too much, because I know if my instruction is correct, then I can get them around the corner. That's not really an issue. But if they're going to press the brake instead of the gas, or the gas instead of the brake, that is going to be a major issue. So if I'm happy that we get those skills sorted out in a car park or on the street, then I will start to build it up. but I don't have a vigorous sort of system of, right, let's do left circuits next, right circuits next, going around parked cars, coming in around parked cars, whatever. Again, it would depend on the area and my ability, I suppose. So if I'm confident I can talk them through it, then there's no reason why I can't bring those elements in. I certainly don't sit and have a structure like, say, left circuits, which is a popular one for instructors, right circuits. I'll mix and match it depending on what I've got around me, really. Not a great one for traveling miles to find the perfect circuit, but then I've got 30 years experience.
I think it's also interesting if you took, for example, your average nursery route with your left and right the junctions that bring you round in a block, etc., etc. I can pretty much tell you that if you think about that average nursery route, they are possibly some of the most challenging routes that your pupils will ever be on, because it's quite often little local areas driven by local people who know the area and who do it 100 times a day, coming in and out of their houses, etc., etc. They cut the corner, they're doing 30s and 20s, they're familiar with their area. I can also guarantee that that's where the people are, so that's where the pedestrians are, that's where the children are on their bikes, that's where the parked cars are. So you've got meeting situations, it's on a bus route, you name it, you've got it. So of all the places, that is possibly the most challenging. It might be the areas that you and I loiter around those first few hours. If I was to do just left circuits, so if I thought about perhaps our nursery route closest to us, and I was to just do left, 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 even within that left, 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 I've got hills, I've got parked cars, I've got meeting situations, whether I like it or not. And I guess this is what Blaine was saying, is that my ability to be able to give someone an instruction. So, for example, if I am looking so far ahead as we're driving down a nice innocent road and there's a parked car on the left, and I'm looking down the road and I can see somebody coming towards me, and I'm able to say, off gas, gentle brake, clutch down, first gear, find me that clutch control, creep the car, creep it. We're just going to let the bus go. Lovely, off you go. Because you can see I'm going to control before I educate. I'm not going to say, oh, look, there's a bus coming. So what we're going to do is, okay, it's too late. Okay, so off gas, gentle brake. We're going to let the bus go. So you have control, because now I've got time to talk, because I've controlled before I educate.
You can educate any time. You can't control once it's gone.
Yeah. You can't control with the benefit of hindsight.
No, absolutely. So looking at locally here, I used to use car parks quite a lot. Now I don't. And one, because we don't have many around here. And when they are, they're too busy anyway. I tend to use streets. Again, full talk for us. Getting that clutch control, I will go and find a slight gradient to really home in on clutch control. So me and Lou will pick pupils up from other instructors like we all do. The first thing I can't think of one that I've not had to do this with, is clutch control. Go and do clutch control. Yeah. Even if they've got a test in a week's time, some reason instructors don't really make a point of clutch control, and you guys have seen some of the videos and know what we mean. Slightly holding it, rolling it backwards, catching it, rolling it forwards, catching it, etc. Little plays with that. I spend not a lot of time, but enough time to get that, because if I can get them good clutch control and pulling away smoothly, and they can brake, what we call brake sense, brake progressively and safely, I can get them to do most things. And where we are here, on a first or second lesson, we will probably get them out into the forest, won't we? Which is pretty straightforward. There's not many junctions. Doing 40 miles an hour, the only thing you've got to avoid is the sheep and cows, and pigs and things like that. But otherwise, it's fine. They're much more predictable than pedestrians, I can assure you. They give the clues, don't they? So they can get through gears, for example, and they feel like they've done something that's really difficult, but actually going through gears is reasonably straightforward, whether you compare it with going to a junction and turning left. On MSPSL, LADA, and everything else you want to add. It's much, all the slowing down, the braking, the stopping at the right time. So instead of using the junction to practice stopping by the line, I might use things like putting up next to parked cars, or a lamppost, or
shadows.
Shadows.
Stop on the shadow.
The beginning of the yellow lines, anything like that, to practice those skills in a less pressured environment, rather than being the first time I try and practice progressive braking is coming up to a stop line, and if they don't do it right, we're going to be in trouble, either far too far back or too far forward. And then if we're too far back and they don't have the clutch control, the sensitive clutch control, we can't edge up to the junctions. That makes sense. So we spend a reasonable amount of time on the first session doing those car control skills, which includes a bit of steering. Then I can go on to junctions and things like that. But I don't have too much of a structure. It just depends on where we are and what we do, where we're going. But if they're struggling with a bit of clutch control and sort of done enough, because if you do too much of it, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, then I will possibly say drive them into a forest car park and get them to drive up and down that 40-mile-an-hour road. There's no junctions, just go into another car park, turn around, come out again, and just change it up a bit, and just do speed and gear changes.
I think
So not everyone's got that.
I think I'm the same as Blaine, and spend a lot of time just car bonding, mucking around, rolling backwards and forwards on hills with nobody around, listening to engines, getting rid of the fear of stalling, getting rid of the fear of revving. You know, all that kind of stuff just needs to happen, so that you can well and truly bond with a car, so that then nothing is scary when you go putting those skills into the real life environment.
Slightly roll on that first hill with a junction, they've got the confidence just to bring the clutch up, something catch it, rather than panicking. Every feet and hands come off everything, and you've got a problem.
It's really interesting, because I do this with my pupils, and after about 28 hours, they say to me, "Louise, when are we going to do hill starts?" And I say, well, you know that junction you just did, that was a hill start. And they're like, was it? My friend said it's a nightmare and she can't get it. She's been doing it with her instructor. You've been doing them, mate, for the last 16 hours, just like, oh, really? And then, or I just pull them up at the side of the road and say, when you're ready, if you'd like to move off, and they move off, and I say, that was a hill start. Was it? Like, what's my mate talking about then? It's just like, because I'm not putting a label on it. We're not doing hill starts. We were doing car control.
Never say to people, right, today we're going off to do roundabouts, because roundabouts will be a natural conclusion of where we are at a different form of junction. So as Lou says, they sometimes say, we haven't done this, we haven't done that. They have done it, but they haven't done it as a subject. If there's a bit of knowledge required for something, then obviously we would cover that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly in my mind. If I was to tell you the things that I absolutely make sure that I have ticked off, if you like, is turning right at traffic lights. If you want to name a subject, turning right at traffic lights is an absolute must for me. Coming on and off slip roads, if you want to call that as a subject. So I'm not doing dual carriageways, but I'm coming off and on slip roads. I think that for me is something that I'm mentally ticking off.
Especially the ones that everyone here.
Yeah, absolutely. Emergency stop. If you want to put a subject title to it, yes, mentally I'm ticking off an emergency stop, and we will, of all the things that I will have a focus on, it will be an emergency stop. Yeah, that's absolutely. The problem with that. And the reason I do that is because that is something that, whether we like it or not, we have to teach for test. It is, yeah, we're teaching. I can't pay enough small children to run out in front of me over a 40-hour period, so that we're not doing it as if by a role play type of thing. So it's something that we have to pretend to do, and so for that reason, there is I put a title on it, and we'll do emergency stops. In terms of manoeuvres, again with manoeuvres, I'm not calling them manoeuvres as such. We're just parking the car. It's just.
It's all naturally happens. You can even do that. Going back to what I would teach, on our first lesson I would do manoeuvring. I would do going into bays, forwards and backwards, if I'm in a car park. But they won't know they're doing bay parking. They're just doing it because we're practicing clutch control, steering, observation, practicing those skills. And why not, if you're learning to move forward slowly, why not practice moving backwards slowly? It's the same skill.
They get themselves quite worked up about going backwards.
The longer you leave it, the more it works.
Yeah, and actually I quite often say to mine, going backwards is exactly the same as going forwards, just in a different direction. I know that sounds really simple, but it is, isn't it? It's exactly the same as going forwards, but just in a different direction. And that kind of just like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
And if you do on the first lesson, just to practice the clutch control and the steering, because the clutch is slightly different in reversal. Gears are slightly different. There's no fear then, because if you're in control and you're talking it through correctly, there's no reason why it should go wrong. And if it's an empty car park, you can reverse it following the white line or something like that. But they're not going to muck it up to a great extent, not any more than they would going forwards. And they go home and they say to their mates on Facebook or whatever, I did some manoeuvre, I went to a bay, and their mates are still in the car park after 8 hours and not going anywhere. So again, you're building up confidence and ability and all those skills. That confidence is another skill, isn't it? I feel that on the first few lessons is something to build up, because then when you do go out in the real world, If the confidence is there, not false confidence, but confidence because they're doing it well, then that's going to make your life a lot easier. They're less likely to stall and panic.
I'm not sure confidence is a skill. Confidence is a byproduct of particular skills,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. It's not a skill, it comes along, doesn't it?
I think, again, if I was to think about subjects or topics that I have in my head that I'm definitely ticking off, continuous movement is something that I will absolutely have made sure is a focus for a number of lessons. So call it a topic if you want, but continuous movement. And I would suggest that when I'm doing continuous movement, meeting situations naturally happen within that. So I'm not putting a label on meeting situations, but meeting situations will be something that I am very much putting them into an environment where there is going to be meeting situations when I'm doing continuous movement. Because if you think about meeting situations, it's awareness, planning, anticipation, car control, and judgment. And in fact, when I have PDIs or ADIs even who say that they want to do meeting situations, or they want to hear me teach meeting situations, they might watch me teach a meeting situation. One of the things, and I might have said this to you guys before, is that when it comes to meeting situations, how I'll introduce meeting situations is that I don't call it that. It's not meeting situations. If you want to put a name to it, it is anything we can possibly do not to meet situations. That's what it's called. Because if we've met, something's gone very wrong. It is a bit catchy, but think about it. Anything we can possibly do not to meet somebody else's situations. And then all of a sudden there is this completely different emphasis on what that means. So I do certainly have that. In terms of manoeuvres, unlike Blaine, I probably don't do manoeuvres constructively very early on.
No, we don't do them as manoeuvres.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Reverse
Because actually at the point where you have a people who's completely bonded with the car, they know what to do with the car, how to do it with the car, they know how big the car is, they know how the car speaks and the language that you have to speak back to the car. You're aware of spatial awareness because that's happened over the last 30 hours. All you're now going to do is put that car in a space, and actually you'll end up not having to teach it. And quite often I find that if I'm having to teach a maneuver, it's because I'm trying to do it too early in somebody's learning journey. And that actually, if they learn how to control a car and all that comes with that, then all they're doing is now controlling a car into somewhere else. So certainly that's something that I've learned over the years, is that if I introduce a maneuver too early, I will end up having to teach it rather than them having to just practice putting a car in a space.
But introduce the skills. So
absolutely.
Do some reversing, but yes, when I teach cars, I teach reversing, steering.
Yeah.
And if we end up in a bay, we end up in a bay, but that's certainly not the object of the exercise. It's the ability just to be able to control the car. Yeah. Slowly, stop, start and steer, but in reverse. And then there is no fear of it. As Lou says, this is another subject we can cover at some point, but neither of us teach manoeuvres. We teach how to put them right if they don't go right, but not how to do them right in the first place. But that's another whole talk on its own, isn't it?
Yeah.
And a bit weird, but it does work. Question there: could you use reversing if space is limited when doing moving off and stopping part 3? By that I mean going back and forwards the same stretch of road for a few meters each way. No problem. I wouldn't say why not.
If it was appropriate, Neil.
Yeah.
If it was people in those very early stages and you're putting the emphasis on car control, clutch control, and awareness and planning. So if you were to move the car backwards now, how would your observations be different? Who would you be aware of differently? Show me where you'd be looking. Yeah, absolutely. If it's linked into your subject, why not? Why not?
Absolutely. I certainly can remember a lesson I sat in on with a PDI, and one of the PDIs on here, Paul, we spoke at length about this, and I think Paul's done it, is basically going to a car park, reversing into a space, and then having spaces in front of you, and going from this space to the space on the left in front, and then straight back, and then from that space to the one that's right in front, and straight back, and then straight forward, and then back into the one that's now left and behind. That's 6 car spaces. You can do an awful lot of skills and knowledge just with 3 spaces here, 3 spaces opposite.
Laura, you're unmuted.
Just a couple of things. One was, I've seen others saying that they've picked a subject they really want to do and want to teach for part 3. And then they kind of want to make the people suit the subject.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And something else is just, is there anything else or anything that you absolutely can't do on a part 3? We see people saying you can't do manoeuvres, which we know isn't true.
Okay.
I'll go coffee. There you go.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So absolutely, picking your pupil and trying to fit your subject choice into your pupil isn't going to work. It has to be what is going to be appropriate to that pupil. So yeah, absolutely. And I hear people say, "Oh, I want to do this on my part 3," and I say, "Well, what does your pupil need?" And they say, "I haven't got a pupil yet." Well, that's the wrong way round. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so you need to be thinking about your pupil and what your pupil is needing, and then how you're going to relate your skills into that pupil.
Absolutely, but I'd also say look at your own skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're really good at full talk through, go with a pupil and a subject that involves that. If you're really good at Q&A or pausing or waiting for it to start happening, jumping in, try and do something that involves that. So know your own skills.
Yeah. You'll see me on the PDI group when people say, I'm thinking about doing roundabouts on my part 3. Has anyone got any ideas or suggestions? And one of the first things I'll say is, what does your pupil need? So what is it your pupil's needing? Even if it's within roundabouts, what is it your pupil needs? Because that's what is going to be the suggestion that I'm gonna give you.
You can fill it in. If it's a judgment, you can do judgment all the way to the roundabout.
What was Laura's second thing?
What can't you teach?
Oh, what can't you teach? Okay. Lots of myths and rumours about what you can't teach. There are only 3 things you cannot do on your part 3. If anyone tells you otherwise, ask them to justify this. The 3 things that you cannot do in your part 3 is a theory-based classroom lesson. You cannot take your pupil and the examiner and a laptop to McDonald's and sit and have a McFlurry while logged onto Theory Test Pro. You can't do that, unfortunately. Okay. The second thing that you can't do on your part 3 is off-roading. Okay, so you can't. That's not the same as bumping over the occasional pavement. I do that very regularly, but you can't go off-roading on your part 3. And the third thing that you cannot do on your part 3 or a standards check is emergency service driver training that involves breaking the rules and regulations. So in other words, you can't be training somebody to drive an ambulance, for example, because they're a paramedic and wanting to get some paramedic training, driver training with you. You can't, in your little car, do 40 and a 30 with your head out the window shouting "Nina, wah wah" as you drive down the road. It's not allowed. Okay.
You can take someone as a paramedic and go and do part 2 sort of stuff. That's
absolutely.
Fine.
You can do, because actually, as a paramedic driver, is it not all about awareness, planning, anticipation, car control, and judgment? You can do the skills. You just can't shout "Nina, wah wah" out your window as you're breaking the speed limit as you're doing them. You can tell I've got small children. I often say to my pupils about "Nina, wah wahs," and they think it's fairly amusing. Anyway, there we go. Those are the 3 things that you're not allowed to do. Anything else goes. Now, I would suggest that perhaps sitting in silence for 40 minutes and doing a mock test isn't particularly going to tick your 17 competencies. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Choice is yours. There's nothing in it that says you can't do it. And certainly in terms of mock tests, I have to say that they do work really well when it comes to standards checks and part 3s. I have a lot of people who do a mock test with a pupil either a few days before or even the hour before their part 3 of the standards check. And the result of the mock test now becomes the subject that you're going to do for your part 3. So that can work really well. If you're thinking about that, and I think I might have talked about it. We did mock tests, and we have done a live chat about mock tests. So if you need to revisit that and have a think about that, you'll hear that talked about. James, you were unmuted. Do you want to unmute again and ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Just want to confirm one of the biggest things I've learned whilst listening to you and Blaine is it's not the pupil. It's not choosing the pupil. It's what they need. So it could be any pupil, and you could be en route to doing a roundabout, and suddenly find out it could be a road junction that they're not still happy with, or things like that. So I've learnt all this now, and I really appreciate that time. So yeah, that's for me. I was thinking about which pupil to take from with part 3. It's not now. I'm not thinking that now. I'm thinking about, you know, what I can do for that A pupil I take. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
What might occur? What might occur on the test? You know what I mean? And by the way, I was driving the Green Goddesses in the army, and I did have my head stuck out the window going beat out because we didn't have any blue lights. So just wanted to mention that.
That's why
Thanks
the
a lot.
rules are changed. It's your fault.
Yes, your fault. You see.
Thanks a lot.
Fab. I understand it doesn't look too good. Can we take a notebook and a few notes on a part 3? It's not that it doesn't look good. Actually, it looks very good if you take a notepad with you. And we'll have examiners who will say, for goodness sake, use a notepad. I'd much prefer to see you using a notepad, taking some notes, looking at some notes, using some prompts if you're needing it, than to sit there with an empty brain wishing you had some notes in front of you. So don't worry about what it looks like. The only thing that goes without saying is that quite clearly you need to be looking at your pupil and the road when it's appropriate to be looking at the pupil and the road, and not the notebook at the point where they're about to kill you. Okay, so it is as simple as that. If you're going to miss faults or miss things happening out there because you're looking down, that is going to be an issue. Second thing you need to be aware of is what you do have on your lap and what you do have in your hand. So you will be criticised for having a pen or a pencil in your hand when you might be needing that hand to grab a wheel or whatever it is that you're needing to grab. So be aware of that. So if you're going to make notes, you're going to make notes while you're stationary or when it's safe.
When they mark the T, they tend to mark the T when there's no potential dangers around.
Yeah.
Something happened, I've pulled over on the left, whatever happens to be.
Yeah.
They're not looking down and marking the sheet where you're ploughing down the high street towards the pedestrian crossing.
Yeah.
So,
third thing to say is just be aware from a safety point of view what you do have in your lap, or obviously nothing that could be around your feet and get in the way of pedals. You want to have a very light notebook or a even just a piece of paper or even a couple of post-it notes rather than any ring-bound things or a clipboard, for example. The reason being is that if you were involved in a crash, if you're involved in a crash that made your airbag explode at 210 miles an hour into your face, whatever is on your lap has the potential, of course, to hit you. We have a colleague who was involved in a crash with pupils. He had a clipboard on his lap and the metal bit of the clipboard embedded itself into his forehead because of the airbag exploding, and he's had more issues with that metal clipboard than he has with the actual crash itself. So just being aware of things like that is quite important.
yeah, what I'd add to that is prompt notes aren't an issue because that comes up a bit. I sat in on one like probably a couple of years ago, and I remember saying to you, and it had sort of used to get them in the 80s, stars in shop windows as if bread half price today, sort of the size of a dinner plate. They had 3 or 4 of these over the dashboard. It was just like, you know, that's just about over the top, but the examiner didn't mention it, didn't say anything about it, wasn't an issue.
The only time examiner's going to mention it is if you didn't use it,
yeah.
and the examiner say, you've got bloody great stars on the dashboard, why didn't you use your stars on the dashboard? That's the only time the examiner's going to mention it.
I certainly had that in role play when it was the old system. People would have little notes for the different PSTs and even get them out of their file and stick them on the thing. And our local examiner who would say things like, so you hadn't even had it written there. Why didn't you just say to me, look at the notepad? Well, that would tell me what to do. That would have been fine. But you had it there and you never even used it. So Lou says that's an issue. If you've got it, you don't use it, you'll be in trouble rather than the other way around. Yeah. For sure. So it's not a memory test. That's really important to say that. It's not a memory test. And under pressure and all those types of things, they don't expect you to remember it, but they do expect you to cover it. So if you can find a way of covering it without remembering it, then go for it. And I think we said before that there's, you know, people trying to be instructors tend to be quite a high percentage of people with dyslexia and things, and that can be a memory issue. So don't be afraid to have something to prompt you. It's not an issue at all.
Anybody have any queries or questions? So I'm just going to read through the chat box, but if anyone wants to unmute themselves to ask something, please do. Okay, I'm just going to read out something from Neil. It says, how much sitting in the car talking through issues can you get away with? For example, what if my pupil does relatively little actual driving? That would be an issue, Neil, because it is a practical test. and driving is a practical skill, of which we're demonstrating those other skills that we're talking about, and you will be expected to have provided your pupil with enough hands-on experience of doing what it is that you are talking about. So I would certainly be aware of how's it worded in the ADI1? It's worded in such a way where it says an equal amount of, or an appropriate balance between theory and practice.
Well, it must take place, but it must be physical learning, which is why you can't just do a theory lesson. So physical learning must take place. Therefore, the only way you're going to physically learn something is to physically do it. Mm-hmm. You can do subjects from someone makes questions about manoeuvres. Moving off and stopping. So you can do a relatively new subject, because a lot of us trainers say it has to be a recap of a subject. It doesn't. It can be a new subject, but as long as learning takes place, and they're not going to want the old-fashioned 10, 15, 20-minute briefing.
Yes, and that's regardless of the subject. So if you were doing moving off and stopping, so yes, you can absolutely do moving off and stopping, but of course you're going to be needing to be doing a relevant amount of theory and practice. You're not going to be sitting there doing an old-fashioned 25-minute briefing on moving off and stopping. You will be expected for them to be able to practice those skills, telling you, asking them what they think they might have to do, them telling you what they already know, that kind of coordination of discussion and chat, bit of teamwork approach, and absolutely get that car moving. Because if you're going to do moving off and stopping, you have to do moving off and stopping. The subject is not the theory of moving off and stopping. It's moving off and stopping.
But then break down the skills, what moving off and stopping actually is. And it's about those things. Clutch control, awareness, planning, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So all of that things we've been talking about. And you don't have to be covering POM in great detail or larger or any of those things. You're looking at the clutch control, brake sense, accelerator sense, steering if necessary.
Jess says, I know that we can't give a list of things that we teach, but I'm worried I might miss something out. If you're worried you might miss something out, Jess, then I am very happy to provide you, and I'm sure Laura will as well. Laura, if you could confirm that from your kind of pupil logs and things, would you be happy to just have the list of the subjects that you either cover mentally or practically within your pupil logs? I'll do the same, Jess. I will share. Should we put it on the PDI group?
If it comes in the full, web document, I can put it underneath this video.
Of which you can choose to add to, take away from, or use just as a prompt, or whatever you want to do. If you're at all worried that you're going to miss something out, that's absolutely fine. But as I said, it's not something that I use, but if you guys are new to it and you just want to have something mental there to say, yes, I have done traffic lights, I have done this and have done that, then you can absolutely use that, even if it's just a list for yourself rather than for your pupils. We can share that.
Yeah, because you can forget stuff. I mean, I can remember sitting on Ella's test, Lou's daughter, and because she didn't really have lessons, she drove to college and horse riding and whatever. We just drove around and we made sure we did right turns at traffic lights with or without filters, etc., etc. And the examiner said, during the test we may do an emergency stop.
I get a text from him in the back of her test saying, I seem to have neglected to teach your daughter how to do an emergency stop. Because the first time he realises that's the point where the examiner is saying, we may or may not ask you to perform an emergency stop. And of course she didn't get an emergency stop, but actually we said to her on the way back, I think, didn't we? Oh God, Blaine didn't teach you how to stop an emergency. She said, she was very matter of fact, she said, I think if a small child ran out in front of me, I might know how to stop the car, mother. Which, of course, is the whole point of it. I mean, the
pulling the way, Mark.
Yeah, the issue, and this is why when it comes to teaching an emergency stop with teachable test, because what an examiner wants to see them do after an emergency stop is one of the main things that they can fail for. Is not looking around before they move off after emergency stop. I'm pretty sure she probably wouldn't have done that. If she'd got it on her driving test. And that is teaching for test. That is probably the only thing that we do teach for.
And I'm saying that just while I think about it, if I know a pupil's going to go out with parents, I will probably chuck it in earlier than I would otherwise.
See, and I don't.
Yeah, just in case they have to.
I don't.
But then if their awareness of planning is quite good, they shouldn't need to.
If you have a pupil who's going out with their parents, I'm pretty sure they'll be able to stop the car if they needed to in an emergency. And we're talking emergency stop. So I have a theory about emergency stops. When it comes to me teaching emergency stop, I have to say that I don't teach that till probably the week before a driving test. Yeah, or possibly, yeah, the hour before a driving test. I don't teach emergency stops before. Now, the reason I don't is because if you are naive enough to think that in a true emergency, with a pupil that has had 28 hours experience, that they are going to get to a brake pedal before you do, you are naive. Okay, so you can teach it as much as you like, but I can tell you that even if you've taught it till the cows come home, you are going to be on that brake pedal before they are, for a start. So don't lure yourself into thinking, well, I've taught them how to do an emergency stop, they're going to react. No, they're not. You will be doing that, or every day of the week you'll be doing it. Secondly, is if you taught a pupil how to do an emergency stop on hour 16, don't think that just because you taught it on hour 16, they're going to remember exactly what to do on hour 38. They're not going to. So again, in terms of, because we teach it for test, because there's such important procedures that have to happen and what an examiner says and all the rest of it, that's why I teach it the week before a test, so it's fresh in their memory, and I'm possibly even recap it just before the test, because it's test specific that they are needing to do.
I'm only covering how the examiner's going to introduce it and what they're going to do.
Absolutely. But honestly, guys, I spend 40 hours teaching a pupil how to not ever have to do an emergency stop. That's the point of it. Spend 40 hours teaching that, because actually, if I asked you guys to honestly, truly tell me the last time you, as an experienced driver, did a full-blown, full-on emergency stop to preserve human life, when was the last time? And I would expect that all of you will remember it as clear as day. Some of you might be thinking, actually, I don't think I've ever had to do it. I think I've done it 3 times in my whole, whatever it is, 28 years of driving, and I can remember all of those 3 times as clear as day, because they are your heart racing, bloody hell moments. Yeah. We harsh brake all the time. Harsh braking is not an emergency stop. Well, we might harsh brake for our pupils fairly regularly. That's not an emergency stop. So if you are sitting here telling me that you are doing emergency stop once a month, what on earth are you doing with your awareness, planning, anticipation, and judgment? I'm going to ask you to have a little look at those 4 skills. So anyway, there we go. Jess, you're unmuted.
Yeah. Speaking of emergency stops, and this might sound really silly, but is there a rule like on the size of an animal? Like if a deer ran out in front of you, you would slam your brakes on and stop. If there's a rabbit, what's the rules on that?
Okay, the general consensus is that emergency stop is there to preserve human life, either yours or somebody else's. So if the deer is going to kill you, of which more people are killed by deer every year than sharks, not that we get many sharks on the A32, but if a deer is going to hit the car and kill you, then you're going to preserve your own life. If you're going to do an emergency stop for the rabbit and the guy behind hits you and breaks his neck, you've not preserved human life. So I think that sometimes that's the easiest way of kind of getting your head around that. So, well, certainly our pupils' idea of it. Your pupils, one of the other reasons why I don't teach emergency stops for pupils is your pupils will do an emergency stop for a leaf because they think it's a frog. I mean, they know how to stop a car if they think they're going to run over a frog leaf. So, you know, they do have the ability to stop the car. I remember it's probably about 20 minutes before a driving test with a boy that I had a few years ago now. We were driving down a long straight road, so national speed limit lane. And in front of us in this lane, I'm not joking, there must have been 50 pigeons. I've never seen so many pigeons, just a whole flock of pigeons in the middle of the road. And that what you guys probably know is that pigeons don't move. Pigeons and pheasants don't move. Everything else seems to get out of the way. But on the whole, pigeons and pheasants don't move. The reasons why they don't move is because they're short-sighted. It's not because they're thick. So if I ever hear any of you say it's because the pigeon is thick, then I will run you over, okay? So they are not thick. They are short-sighted, and we need to go around putting little glasses on pigeons. But by the time they see you, it's too late. That's why they don't move. Okay, so there we were, 50 pigeons. We're doing 48 miles an hour down this road, and I've got a lorry behind me, and I can see the pupil looking in his mirror, looking at the pigeons, and I'm saying to him, don't stop. Do not stop, because if you have that situation, you're going to have to override your pupil. Okay, so, and of course I haven't got a gas pedal, so I'm saying, do not stop for the pigeons. Do not, keep going, keep your gas on, keep your gas. Wow, it was like an explosion in a pillow factory. We hit those pheasants. It was just feathers everywhere. And you know, we got to test. we got to test with pigeons stuck in my front grill. So I had dead pigeon and blood and feathers all over. So kicking dead pigeon out of my grill as we go to test. It was really, really embarrassing. And you know, didn't think anything of it. 2 weeks later, the smell in my car, and I'm thinking, what the hell is that? And I couldn't think what it was. And for 3 weeks I had this smell. Of course, I realised that it's just dead pigeons stuck underneath my car, rotting. Oh my God, it's just horrible.